Hi,
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm good.
Good, 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 good. So, do you have any interest in porcelain?
I'm not familiar with the artifacts like porcelain or vase. If I buy a house, I need to decorate the house. I need to buy some porcelain or vase,
Good.
but it must be very cheap.
Okay, so you're not opposed to that idea. You're okay with that idea.
Mm-mm.
Okay, good. All right. So here's a short course. You want a short course, a very short course in porcelain?
Oh, sure, sure.
Okay, because the Chinese invented it. Okay.
Yeah.
So when the Chinese were eating out of earthenware bowls, which is not porcelain, it's just clay, but it's put in the sun or it's fired. The English were still eating out of their hand or a wooden cup. So the Chinese were far more sophisticated very early on. So the thing that makes porcelain different from earthenware, also called clay, is something called kaolin. So basically, the Chinese were working with clay and firing it, and then they discovered kaolin, which I hope I spelled right. It's a very fine white clay, and it's also called China clay. Now, this very fine white clay has two advantages. And when it's fired like that, it becomes very hard. You would actually have to like slam it on the floor to break it. Okay.
Okay.
So Chinese were very happy with their porcelain. The emperors were loving the porcelain. Once they had a mold and they had a vase of various different shapes, the amphora shape or the narrow neck shape. Um, anyway, so once they had the bowl, it went from the person who made it to the person who fired it in the kiln. Kiln is an oven,
Mm-mm.
especially for firing clay. Uh, Not pizza, but it could
Okay.
be probably. Anyways,
It's very
so
similar. It's
mhm,
yeah. It's just the oven to fire the clay, right?
exactly, exactly. It's very hot. So then it would go to the person who fired it, and then it would go to the person who painted it. So, what the Chinese did from the get go, from the very beginning of time, is they understood the value of the assembly line. One person could be very good at one thing, another person could be very good at something else in the process. So there was never an attribution of maker.
Mm-mm.
So nobody ever signed this stuff. Um, so the first painter would paint it with white slip. Slip is what they called um, it's kind of a clay, but it's also a paint.
Okay.
So yeah, so they called it slip.
Mm-mm.
So they would paint it white, and then it would go back to be fired again because every color was fired separately. which meant that there was a lot of opportunity for things to break. Um, so then, of course, the blue and white, which is cobalt and a white paint,
Mm-mm.
so famous, so classic. I mean, they still do it with just to make uh, cheap little uh, vessels that they're going to fill up with something to ship out. You know,
Mm-mm.
those break pretty quickly. They're not really good porcelain. All right. So the blue and white came along, and I think blue and white porcelain hit its heyday. I'm going to say the 15th century.
Mm-mm.
And a really good painter would paint it with leaves and whatever he wanted, flowers, leaves, lotus blossoms, and with flourishes. A master painter would not make a vase perfect. He would have flourishes. You would see his own style in the piece. Right? So the emperors loved this stuff. Also, they put it on the Silk Road and traded it around the world to so from China to the Middle East, from the Middle East up to the Mediterranean, from the Mediterranean over to Germany and England. So that was more or less the Silk Road.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So so the emperors loved this stuff, and the really, really good porcelain painters were highly revered by the emperor and kept very well. So around 1856, more or less, a German company called KPM sent scouts to Florida, to to China, sent scouts to China and stole the formula for porcelain. They took some of the kaolin back, they learned how to work it, and they started making very expensive European style porcelain. The dainty little teacups, the plates, things like that. So the Germans stole the Chinese formula. And once that happened, everybody could make porcelain. Um, not everybody did. In America, they had some kaolin clay in South Carolina, not much, but there for a very brief period of time before the revolution, they were making porcelain in like South Carolina and shipping it to Pennsylvania. So this is a very esoteric piece of knowledge that I picked up when I was writing about this stuff.
What is esoteric?
All right, a good definition is means that it's likely to only be understood by a few people with a specialized knowledge of a subject. Yeah, so then porcelain started taking on 3 dimensions in the West. And, uh, and the porcelain makers started dripping porcelain so that it looked like moss. And then they started building like butterflies, 3 dimensional butterflies to sit on the moss or a flower or something. And that's called palissyware. Anyway, it's just, you don't need to know this, but it's just that if you come across a piece of porcelain or a dish that you like and it's like got lots of decoration on it, you might say, oh, that's palissyware. Or sometimes they'll put a 3 dimensional rose on it. So anyway, it's all the same thing.
Okay. Hmm.
So I can't imagine that your house is going to have much porcelain in it, but you can get very good knockoffs. Know what that is? It's a copy. A copy. You can get very good knockoffs for not a ton of money. You can even get them in Target and sometimes Walmart. Oh, I know, what's it called? Home Goods or something like that. So these are places that will sell you imitations that are mass produced. They're not expensive, but they have the look. All right, so we've covered watercolors, porcelain. I know. I told you about the Tang horse. I mentioned it once before. So the Tang Dynasty, during the Tang Dynasty, which I forget when it was, around 900, 1000,
Yeah.
um, horses were very important. Also, women who could ride horses were very important.
Mm-mm.
And so they decorated with these gorgeous, gorgeous horses, or sometimes with small statues of female equestrians on the horse. And sometimes they played a game like polo. So you might see references to that somewhere. And then you can go Tang Dynasty or whatever.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.